Today's daf is daf chav zayin. So we'll start with Tan Rabbanan on the second line. Me'emasai kofinas mitos. We know that the ovel is chayav in kfiyas hamita. He's got to turn over his beds, and he has to sleep on a turned over bed. And the question is, at what point is he obligated to begin his avelus? And Kfiyas Hamita here is just an example of many different dimensions of avelus. This is representative of Niug avelus. And there's a machlokus here, when does Niug avelus begin? According to Rabbi Eliezer, Mishiyetze mi Pesach Beisel, they're on the way to the Kvura. And Rabbi Yeshua Omer, no, it's Mishiyistem Yisasem Agoleh. And Stimas HaGolel is a kiyum of Kvura, and with Kvura, the Nihuge Avelus, the obligation of Avelus, is generated. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, there's a significance to the fact that they took the mess out of the house. Again, I don't understand one thing, according to Rabbi Eliezer, who says the mess is in the house. You know, today, I guess we have a different sociology. You know, we keep the mess in, usually, you know, with the Chevra Kadisha, you don't usually leave the mess in the house. Again, if the person died in the house, obviously the mess is in the house, and we go directly from the house to the base HaKvaros. I'm not sure. Now, Stimas HaGolel is a gigantic issue. Exactly what Stimas HaGolel is, according to Rashi, it means when they cover over the graveside. And according to other Rishonim, the Rabbeinu Chanal and others, it's a more advanced stage in which the burial is completed. Then they put a stone on top of the grave. But that's what initiates Avelus. And in fact, after Stimas HaGolel, in our minhag, we have what's called the Shura. And people line up to be Menachem the Ovel. The Gemara knew about Shura, and the Gemara could have given the example of Shura, which is going to take place even before Kfiyas Hamita. Masechet Lil Azaken, and Kevin Shiyotza mi Pesach Beiso, Omer Lahem Rabbi Eliezer Kfu Mito Sechem. But Kevin Shenistam HaGolel, Omer Lahem Rabbi Yeshua Kfu Mito Sechem. So this Maisa that's recorded here is just a duplicate of what we saw in the previous Brisa, but there is one possible chidush here, and that is that there's a Maisa of Kfiyas Hamita even without sleeping in the bed, and we're going to elaborate on that and expand on that as we go through the sugya of Kfiyas Hamita, meaning as soon as they left the house, already Rabbi Eliezer was instructing them, Fu mito sechem. They're not ready to go to sleep. I mean, he could have waited until the nightfall. Why do you have to tell them at that point? I think what we derive from it is that the Maisa of Kfiyas Hamita is itself a kiyum of Avel. It's not just sleeping in a mita kfuya, but being kofa the mita. And then we're going to see that if you have many beds in the house, you're chayv Kfiyas Hamita, because be all the beds in the house. Even beds that you don't intend to sleep in. It could be that there are other people amongst the family members that are sitting shiva that might be in other houses, and there's got to be a Maisa Kfiyas Hamita in all those houses. And that's why if somebody comes to be Mavra with Sudas Havra, the Ovel, and he's not an Ovel, then he should be sitting on a regular chair, because if he sits together with the Ovel on a Mita Kfuya, then he's already being Noeg Avelus. But in addition to sitting and lying on a Mita Kfuya, there's a Maisa Kfiyas Hamita. That's a kiyum of Avelus. Tana Rabbanu, we learned to the Brisa. Me'emasai zokfinas hamitos be'erev Shabbos. Meaning, when does Avelus terminate on Erev Shabbos? We go into Shabbos, there's no Avelus, but he has to maintain his Avelus the entire day. So at what point can he undermine and neutralize the Kfiyas Hamita by being Zokef Hamita? And the Brisa responds and establishes Mina Mincha Ulamal, from Mincha time and on. Now let's assume that Mincha here would mean mincha gedola, which means a half hour after chatzos. And that's the time in which he can already stand up from his avelus, because with mincha, we're already projected into Shabbos. Then we have something called mincha katana, which is much, much later, which if you subtract from Shkia going backwards, that's 2.5 hours before Shkia. And Tosfos really raises the question as to whether our Brisa refers to mincha gedola, which would be 5.5 hours before Shkia, or mincha katana, which is only 2.5 hours before Shkia. The Mukhi Yosef is the big mach. Lomais, I think we are mekil because we paskin that as soon as the last Menachemim leave on Friday morning, at that point the Avelus is curtailed. Amar Rabbi Bar Huna, Eno afal pikein eno yoshiv alej. Even though we no longer have what you would call a base Avel, but nevertheless we do have some element, although a reduced element, of Niyug Avelus, and therefore he should not be sitting on his chairs until Shedef. So the fascinating thing about Rabbah here is that on the one hand, Mitzvah Kikulo, and therefore he's allowed to zokef his meat, but on the other hand, he's not allowed to sit in a mita's kufa, he's got to sit in a mita kfuya until darkness. So there are two dinim over here, obviously. There's one din of malos that we consider the day as already it's complete, as if he had another day of Avelus because Mitzayom Kikulo. But as far as Nihuge Agavra is concerned, that's already a different halach. And that he has to refrain from until Shabbos actually enters. Motzai Shabbos, Afal Pisha Ein Lo Reishiv El Yom Echad. Let's say, for example, the mess was buried before Shabbos. Now, Shabbos would conclude the Avelus. But what happens if the mess, let's say, was buried on a Sunday? So then Sunday would be the 7th day of Shiva. I mean, that depends on whether Shabbos is all a minion Shiva. So you have to make the calculation. But in any event, the point of the Gemara and this Brisa is that on Motzi Shabbos, even though all he needs is one more day, Choser v'kofa. After Shabbos, he has to again turn upside down his beds, which means that we're not going to apply Miktzah Yom Kekulo to Yom Rishon until the morning. And therefore the night, which is Motzi Shabbos, is still very much a part of his Shiva. Tan Rabbanu learned in the Brisa, Kofa mitaso, lo mitaso bilvad hu kofa, ela kol mitos yechel so beso kofa. Not only does he have to turn over his bed that he sleeps in, but he has to turn over all the beds in the house. And maybe if our minig of covering the mirrors is a replacement for Kfiyas HaMita, we cover all the mirrors in the house. He's got beds all over the place in 10 different rooms. Kofes Kulon. He's got to do a Kfiyas HaMita on all of them. And this again, Rabbi Osai teaches us that Kfiyas HaMita is not just the Kiyam and the Gavra, meaning that he is experiencing the grief of sitting and sleeping in a mita kfuya, but it's also a maisa of kfiyas hamita, so that if you have 10 beds, each bed is mechayev that maisa of kfiyah. You have 5 brothers, meis echad, one brother died, and the other brothers are sitting wherever they're sitting in different places. Kulam kof. Each one in his house has to be kofas hamita, even though there might be only one base avel, but there's a separate halach in kiyum and niyag avelus of sleeping in a mita kfuya. So again, this has to do with the sociology of those days. We saw this already in Masechet Shabbos, that sometimes they would use a mita as storage space. Sometimes even the mita had drawers underneath. You'll see it even today, but rarely. In those days, it was quite common. In fact, the Gemara has a question in Muktzah. If he stores, let's say, matbeos on a mita or an arniki on a mita, does that make the mita to a basis l'dover as? So you see that a mita is used for many different functions. And now we're talking about a mita that was designated for kelim. And that's not a mita that you sleep in. It has a different category, and it therefore does not generate a chiyuv of kfir. Dargosh, the Bryce says, Ein Sarch L'chfosa. Okay, so I have to apologize. The next sugya about Dargosh is again the same thing that I've been telling you over and over again. I need access to pictures. I'm going to try to do the best I can, but until I see it with my eyes, I don't know what a Dargosh is. The Gemara is going to give a few possibilities as to what a Dargosh is. Anyway, Eino Tzarch L'Foso Elazokfo. He can have it standing vertically. He doesn't have to turn it upside down. And Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer, Dargosh Matir Es Karbitov Vu Nofel Me'el. In the case of a Dargosh, according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, it's not sufficient that you stand it up upright vertically, but rather what you have to do is you have to take off the loops and the straps. In other words, every bed is made up of two elements. There's the frame of the bed, and then there's the kind of mattress, so to speak, on which you lie. And the frame of the bed is attached to the mattress with different kinds of materials that loop into the side of the bed, to the frame of the bed. So he has to loosen the loops, and the mattress, so to speak, falls down. And that's going to be a kiyum of Kfiyas Hamita, according to Rav Shimon Gamliel, in the case of a Dargosh. So whatever sheet there is of material that's stretched and held up by a wooden frame that's fascinated with loops, then the loops are untied, the sheet falls to the ground, and that is a kiyum of the obligation of Mita Kfuya. Now, exactly where he's going to sleep, I don't know. I don't think he's going to sleep on the Dargosh. He'll sleep on a different bed, which is a Mita Kfuya. But as far as the Dargosh is concerned, Shimon Gamliel holds that a Dargosh generates a chiyuv of Kfiyas Hamita. The Tanna Kama never went that far. My Dargosh, what is a Dargosh? Amar Ula Arsa de Gada. Okay, this is a very complicated concept that comes from a different world, a different sociology. It's very difficult for us to appreciate. They used to take one bed and designate it for a malach of Mazel Tov. And nobody would sleep in that bed. We'll soon see that maybe in rare occasions, like a Nasi who's sitting Shiva, they would allow him to sit in that bed. But as a general rule, it was designated in such a way that nobody slept in. So it's a different kind of a mita. It doesn't have your shame category of mita that would generate kfiyas hamita. Because kfiyas hamita, whether I'm sleeping in this bed or I'm not, but it's a bed that's designated for sleeping. This is a bed that's designated for the malach of Mazel Tov. He says it's being done to honor the angel. Because otherwise he has a problem here of nichush. This might be a violation of menachich. It's, you're using all sorts of spooky stuff here. But if it's in honor of a malach, apparently that's not menachich. Amalei Rabba said, Eleveata, if you're telling me this Dargosh is a real bed, but it's designated for a malach, is Gabi Melech Desnan. We have a Mishnah in Sanhedrin with regard to Kavod HaMelech, that Kol Ha'am Mesubim Al Haaretz, when the meal is being served, the king, if he's an Avel, who Meisiv Al Dargosh, he'll sit on a Dargosh and he'll eat his meal reclining on a Dargosh, and the rest of the people will recline on the ground. Now the question is, Mika Midi Diado Idna Lo Osmine. We don't allow anyone to sleep on this Dargosh. Ahashtem Osmine, and now we're allowing an Avel to sleep or sit on this Dargosh that you're telling me, Ula, that this Dargosh was designated for a Malach? Maskif L'Rav Sheish, my kush, I don't understand what bothers you, Rabbi. Well, what kind of argument do you have? I'll give you an example, he says, Ravash. There are certain things that we don't do, but we do for the Avel. If a person is not an Avel, we don't feed him and give him drink. But Hashta, now that he's an Avel, that's the Sudas Habrada. We have to bring him the food and the drink. So therefore, we might find in the case of a melech that even though we normally don't allow anyone to sleep on this bed because it's designated for the malach, but in the case of Kvod Malchus, we're going to allow him, if he's an Avel, to sleep on that bed. Therefore, that Kash of Rabbah is wiped off. Sami Mikan. Eli Kash al Kashi. Here's a Kash from a Brisa. The Brisa says, Dargosh Einot Tzarch L'chfoso. There's no requirement of kfir el ezogfo. The arsa the gado is amay enu tzorch lekofo lekfoso. But Tanya, we have a brisa or Mishnah. Ha kofa mitaso lo mitaso bilvad hu kofel kol mitas sheyesh lo b'tov beso. So there's a chiyuv of a ma'isa kfir on every bed, whether you're sleeping there or you're not sleeping there. And therefore, the Gemara thinks that in a dargosh, even though they're not sleeping there, but it's a bed, it's identical to any other bed. So the Gemara says, "My kusha, what kind of cash is that? Not every mita is classified as a mita. We said before that there's a mita that's singled out and designated as a storage place for utensils. It's not a mita, even though it might look identical to any other mita. The Sanya we learned in a brayso, and therefore, if you're asking me the kasha, why is it the dargosh ain't tzarich l'foso? Why don't you ask me a better kasha? Why is that a mita? The answer is that you can have a physical mita, but legally it's not classified as a mita. And here too, nobody's sleeping in the dargosh. It's the angel's bed. Elikasha hakash. But I do have a way of completely rejecting Rabbah in his. Ula in his explanation of what a dargosh is. Because the Brisa about Dargosh says there, Shimon Gamliel Omer Dargosh Matir Karbitov Vunofel Me'elov. Right, he loosens up the connection between the we call it the mat, but what was the word we used here? A sheet of material, right, that's connected to the wooden frame. We disconnect it from the wooden frame. Isal Gedaitach Arsa de Gada, my Karbit in Islam. Why is the Brisa describing this dargosh as something that has chavitim, that has these loops? That's not the way we construct the bed. And in the footnote, he says that an ordinary bed is made of ropes wrapped around its frame. Not that we take this this stretched sheet of material and we fasten it to the frames by looping it into loops. So the description of dargosh in this brisa is not only yafa. It doesn't reflect the description of ula that it's an arsa degada, which it means it's a normal classic bed. And therefore, at this point, the Gemara takes ula and shelves ula. Now we have to find an alternative interpretation of what dargosh is. Kiyasa Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel. Omer lahu me Rabbanon for Rabbi Tachlifa bar Marava Shmei. He talks to Rabbi Tachlifa, who is from Eretz Yisrael. He's called a Marava, Westerner. This Rabbi Tachlifa was a leather maker, and there was a separate section in the marketplace for leather makers. So he knew a lot he was an expert on leather making. My dargosh arsa d'tzola. Tzola means leather. So this is a bed of leather. What's a bed of leather? What do you mean? The whole bed is made of leather? So if you take a look, he writes in the footnote, I think there's even a picture here, but it's not a good picture. No offense to Artsville. But he says that there were collapsible beds used by the nobility in their travels. Collapsible beds, nice. I thought that was a modern invention. They consisted of wooden frames with holes in their sides through which loops were hung. A leather sheet with straps at each of its ends would be suspended from this frame by looping its straps through the loops hanging from the frame. And then they would attach legs to the four corners of the frame. So that's what the Gemara is suggesting as far as what a dargosh is. and it's enough to loosen the loops that are hanging from the frame. Again, we need a picture for this. He's saying that its bindings are from within, meaning the leather straps that attach the leather sheet to the frame do so by means of loops inserted through holes in the sideboards of the frame. And a mita, a real mita, which generates a chi of kfir in the case of Avelis, is siruga al gava. The bindings are not from within, but over it. In other words, the ropes that form the support for the sleeping surface of the bed wrap around the sideboards of the frame, but do not pass through it. And how do we pass in this machlok between Tanakh and Gamliel? Omer Rav Yaakov bar Acha, Omer Rav Yeshua ben Levi, halacha Rav Gamliel, which means that there is a quasi kiyum of kfiyas hamita, even with regard to a dagosh, when you untie its loops. And we said before that when you untie the loops, then the sheet of material that stretched across the wooden frame now falls to the ground. And that is your kiyum of a ma'aseh kfiyah with regard to a dagosh. Rav Yaakov bar Acha, Rav As, mita shenakliteo yotzin zokfa v'daya. Okay, so this is what we call a canopy bed. And naklita are the posts, and yotzin. And evet, there are posts that form like a triangle, and you can't turn it upside down because it's got a point. That's a triangle. But zokfa, the other, what you could do is sort of like fold it and have it standing vertically erect. He writes here that since it has two posts, one at each end, and its posts protrude over the top of the bed, it cannot be made to stand upside down. All right, but he doesn't tell you how you do kif on this. Okay, fine. Tan Rabbana, we learned to the Brisa, Yashein al Gabi Kisei. Let's say this Avel did not fulfill his obligation of Kfiyas Hamita. So he's sitting on a chair, or al Gabi Udaine, on a large mortar, or Gedol Mizu al Gabi Karka, even if he's discomforted by sitting on the ground. Lo Yotzi Dechovasu, he's not fulfilled his obligation of Kfiyas Hamita. Om Rabbi Yochanan, Shelo Kiyeh Kfiyas Hamita. And here he has a very important note from the Ruki Yosef. He says, even though he does not sleep in the comfort of a regular bed, he is still required to overturn his bed. The obligation for a mourner to overturn his bed is not so that he should sleep in a mita kfuya, rather it's a requirement on its own, a ma'aseh kfiyah. This is it. Thus, even if an Avel sleeps on the ground rather than on an overturned bed, he still has not fulfilled his obligation unless he does a ma'aseh kfiyah to overturn his bed as well. Now, once he overturned his bed, there are more paskins that he's not obligated to sleep in the overturned bed. He can sleep on the ground or on the mortar if he so wishes. You're allowed to sweep the floor. The floors those days weren't stone floors like we have. And you would sprinkle water on top of the ground in order to avoid making dust. And all this is done in a base oven. This is not antithetical to the kiyum of base oven. Umadichin, we could wash karos. Karos are bowls. Kosos are cups. Slochios are larger jars, and ketonios are smaller jars. The base oven. All this could be done in the base oven. Now, I'm not sure if they allow the oven to do this. You just see here for a second. He says, since these are routine activities performed in every home, they are permitted in the house of mourning. Oh, he says that these are tasks that a mourner is permitted to do himself. They're not considered work. Wow. I would have said that others should do it for him, but not him. Now, we're going to try to avoid what I call luxury, pleasure activities in a base of. We saw yesterday that he should not be holding his grandson on his lap, because he starts laughing and so forth. But here we're really evaluating our veils from the perspective of ashirus, of wealth. We're going to have a whole sugya here on Amid Beis about the ashirim and the aniyim. But let's not overindulge in a base oven. So to bring mugmar, right, that's where you put the spices on top of the coals, and the smoke comes up. So it's like a barbecue, not a barbecue, a campfire. So this is not appropriate for a base oven. Again, these are kiyumim in a base oven. The reach that he smells, that's not also. There are many isurim on an oven. I think the Rambam has 11, if I remember correctly. So, but reach, to smell is not one of the 11 isurim. But as far as the base oven is concerned, mugmar and besamim is not appropriate for base oven. I asked, what are you talking about? Ain is that sova tadi kapara. We have a brayso of ain mevarchim lo ala mugmar full of sub base oven. We don't make the brach, but beruchei udulo mevarchinon ha isuye maisinon. Apparently, we do bring spices and incenses into a base oven, and that's not antithetical to the kiyum base oven. Lo kasha habe base oven habe base hamanachim. We do not bring spices and mugmar, which we said was incense, into a base oven. We have here a brisa in the name of Bar Kapara that we just omit the bracha on the reich, but we do bring it in. I'm sorry, but we had the first brisa. I'm saying ein mevin esa mugmar lebeis oven. So the answer is that you're right, Ein Mevian Mugmar LeBeis Ava, but the Beis Ava is divided up into two parts. There's the part where the Avelim are sitting, and then there's a part where the Menachemim are sitting, that's called the Beis HaMenachemim. There, we're going to bring incense and spices, because that's not a Beis Ava. So we have a Beis Ava that's not totally a Beis Ava. Only half of it is a Beis Ava. The annex, of the Beis Ava, which is absolutely contiguous, but it's designated for the Menachemim, that is not a base ovel. Now, I don't know that in our society we have something called a base hamanachim, but I'll tell you the truth, if it was up to me, I would institute a base hamanachim. What do I mean? Why not allow menachemim to come in one at a time? You know how, like some stores, especially during COVID, they have that red thing, and then if people left, and it would be green, and then you're allowed to go in. There's a maximum capacity. I think it would be nice if people came in one after the other. I find very often I come, and I don't know exactly how to pull it off because I came later and people are leaving, or I want to leave early and people are staying. I don't know whether to be menachem or not. What? It would be nice if somebody organized it in a way that there was a Beis HaMenachim. But in any event, the advantage of a Beis HaMenachim is that we can enjoy the incense. Everybody wants to smell mugmar. And now we're up to the Mishnah. Ein molichin lebeis avel. Okay, now, once again, these are luxury items that should be avoided in a base oven. Base oven should be, toned down. This is not a place like on Leil Pesach that says, children, bring out all your beautiful kelim to the Seder table, but not in a base oven. Base oven has to be, low toned down. So don't bring a tavla. Now, this is a specific focus on the Sudas Havra. So you can bring out a Sudas Havra in a fancy tray or in an iskutala, which is a large bowl. And all this has to be avoided. Velobik bekanon in a large basket. So again, these are all very ostentatious utensils like silver bowls and so forth and so on, they should be avoided as far as the Sudas Havras. So the Elbis Salim, very simple baskets, no elegance over here. This is not the time to show off your fine silver. The Einom Birchas Avelim b'Moed, and during Chol Moed we abstain from reciting the Birchas Avelim. We do have Nicham Avelim even on Chol Moed, but we omit Birchas Avelim. But we do have Nicham Avelim. In the Shura, Potres Harabim, and immediately after we finish the Kvura, we tell everybody to go home. Why? Why are we telling everybody to go home? Because there's no head of Esped on Chol HaMoed. We'll see about Talmud Chacham who dies. It's different. But as a general rule, Chol HaMoed is also behesped. Ubetainis. You're not allowed to fast. You're not allowed to eulogize. Send the rabbim home. So lahaglas ahesped, because if you allow the people to linger around, somebody's going to get up and he's going to make a eulogy, and that you're not allowed to do. It's Pogan Simchas Chol HaMoed. V'lo shel nashim liola. We have apparently what's common, if it's not Chol HaMoed, to bring the coffin outside in the public and make a public eulogy. But that's not appropriate in the case of a woman. Now, what's this all about? Why shouldn't we give a woman the same cover that we give a man? If a man cover was saying we don't eulogize the woman out in public. So for this, we have to know that it's a little bit gory, so I apologize, but blood may flow from them and stain their shrouds. And this is embarrassing because it looks like it's dam nida that's coming out. So all this should be done in private. Keep in mind, we're not talking about the caskets that we know today, those fast, you've seen the Goyim burying caskets that were thousands and thousands of dollars. You know what I mean? We're talking about shrouds, we're talking about tachrichim. So you can imagine that dam goes out of the tachrichim. So that's pogeh in the cover of the Isha. And I'm not sure what kavod means. It means the kavod of the mess. And what does she care about? She's already on her way on a long journey. But it probably means kavod achayim. It probably means the relatives. Gemara says, Tana Rabbana b'Rishona hayimalichim b'beis ha'avel ashirim b'klasos shel kesef shel zav. Initially, when they were Mekayim, the mitzvah of Sudas Havrah, they used to bring out the food in the most sophisticated, elegant baskets of silver and gold. But for poor people, they couldn't afford these baskets of silver and gold. Besale nitzarim shalarova klufa. These are baskets made of willow tree, peeled willow twigs, not worth a dime. By aniyah misbaishin, and there was a busha for the aniyah. Iskidu she'akol mevim besali nitzarim shalarova klufa mivnei kavod shalami. This mamish reminds us of the last Mishnah Tainis about Tu B'Av. They would borrow each other's garments. We don't want to embarrass, in this case, the aniyah. And we're going to have one takana after the other that reflects this idea of we don't want to embarrass the poor people. One takana after the other until we get to the Gemara about Rabbi Gamliel. Oh, that's going to be wild. So it says, Bitchila is Berishona Yamashkin, the base of Ashirim Biskuchis Levana, white glass, a very expensive glass. Maniyim Biskuchis Svua, but regular classic colored glass. Vayaniyim Ispaishim, Eskinu Shirakol, Mashkin Biskuchis Svua, Mibnei Kvodon Shalaniyim, Berishona Yamagalim Pnei Ashir. This I find very difficult, because I always thought that's the difference between them and us. We don't expose the face of a corpse, we cover it. But I must have made a big mistake. And the Nebuchadnezzar Yosef says that this is all part of the process of tshuva. of stimulating people to weep. Look at this face now; it's decaying. It was robust. It was handsome. It's like Maskirin Lo Yom Misa. That's a way of bringing us to do tshuva. But initially, the old minig was that they were megala pnei ashirim umachasa pnei aniyim. It's unbelievable. The aniyim's faces would decay very quickly because they weren't well fed. They were undernourished. Their skin, their dermatology was dark. Umachasa pnei aniyim, and therefore they would cover the face of the aniyim that died, so that the people shouldn't see it. They were darkened. Because of famine. Look what they do to you in Ani. They cover the face. Everyone. We cover their face. So that's why we're used to, Lahavdil Elif Alfi. We don't have a wake, where they go by and the prime minister here dies. I don't know. Because I don't want to say any laws against the government. And a dargosh is apparently a very, very fancy, made out of leather, if you remember. Vaniyim and the poor people, be kliva. Well, what does it say? Kli. Can't make it out. I think it says klicha. Okay.